My CEO husband replaced me with his young mistress, so I pulled 52% from his luxury company empire. Stay with me until the end of my story, and if it resonates with you, please show some love by subscribing, liking, and sharing. It means more than you know. My name is Amara Ellison. I am 34 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed I was living a dream that I had worked so hard to create. I wasn't born into wealth. I wasn't given a golden ladder to climb. What I had was grit, determination, and love for a man I thought was my partner in every sense of the word. His name is Dorian Ellison, and when we met, he was just another ambitious graduate student with big ideas, but no money to back them. From the very beginning, I was the one holding us together. I used the small inheritance my late father left me to help Dorian start his company. I handled the paperwork, built the first website, balanced the books, and even took on extra shifts at my accounting job just so we wouldn't drown before we even got started. While he dreamed, I executed. While he made promises to investors, I made sure the numbers added up. We were a team, or so I thought. For years, our life looked picture-perfect from the outside. We had a beautiful home in Chicago, matching luxury cars, and our names graced business magazines as one of the power couples to watch. Everyone admired us, and I wore my role as the supportive wife with pride. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive, not because of the money, but because I believed in our love story. The sacrifices I made didn't bother me back then. I gave up my dream of opening my own financial consulting firm so that Dorian could chase his. I believed that when he succeeded, we both succeeded. I believed that someday, when the empire was stable, I would finally get my turn. He always told me, "Be patient, Amara. Our time is coming." And I held on to those words like scripture. But looking back, I realize now that I was blind. I ignored the small cracks in the picture because I wanted so badly to believe the life we built was unshakable. I worked quietly in the background while Dorian became the face of the company, giving speeches, shaking hands, smiling for the cameras. He basked in the spotlight while I was hidden in the shadows, yet I didn't complain. I thought that's what love looked like. I had no idea then that the same man I trusted with my entire life was already planning to replace me. I didn't know that every late night I justified, every distance I felt, every little lie I ignored was preparing me for the deepest betrayal of my life. This is where my story truly begins. At first, I tried to ignore the changes. Dorian had always been a hard worker, so when he started saying he had to stay late at the office, I told myself it was just the pressure of running a growing company. But something about the way he carried himself began to gnaw at me. He used to come home tired, but happy to see me. Now he walked through the door distracted, his phone buzzing constantly, and his eyes never quite meeting mine. The biggest red flag was the scent. It wasn't mine. I knew every fragrance I owned, every lotion I used, and every soft perfume that lingered on my clothes. What clung to his suit when he got home was foreign, floral, and far too deliberate to be an accident. At first, I convinced myself it was from brushing past someone in a crowded elevator. But as the weeks passed, the smell became stronger, more familiar, like it was trying to announce its presence in my marriage. One evening, while tidying up his study, I noticed a folder left half open on his desk. Inside were receipts from an upscale jewelry store downtown. My heart raced as I flipped through them. Diamond bracelets, necklaces, rings, expensive pieces that I had never seen, never worn. For a moment, I tried to believe maybe he was planning to surprise me. Maybe our anniversary was coming early. But deep down I knew. The jewelry wasn't for me. I waited until he came home that night, my hands trembling as I held the receipts out to him. "Dorian," I said softly, "who are these for?" He glanced at the papers, then at me, and instead of guilt or apology, there was irritation in his eyes. He smirked, shook his head, and let out a bitter laugh. "Amara, do you even hear yourself?" he said. "You're paranoid. You've always been too suspicious. These are business gifts. Not everything is about you." His words stung sharper than a slap. Business gifts. As if I was crazy for even questioning him. I wanted to believe him, to let the explanation settle my restless heart, but the way he dismissed me, like I was foolish, like I was beneath even deserving the truth, cut deeper than the evidence in my hand. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling while he slept peacefully. My chest ached with a quiet heartbreak I couldn't put into words. The man I had built my life around, the man I had trusted with everything, was slipping away from me. I realized then that I wasn't his partner anymore. I wasn't his confidant or his safe place. I was just an accessory, something polished to complete the image he wanted the world to see. And that was the moment the first pieces of my perfect picture began to crumble. Her name was Talia Monroe. I didn't know it at first, but the moment I heard it whispered around the office, it burned itself into my memory. She was 26, freshly hired as Dorian's executive assistant. I had met dozens of his employees before, but something about her lingered. She was polished, ambitious, with the kind of beauty that drew attention the second she walked into a room. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, to believe she was just another employee, but my gut told me otherwise. The confirmation came at the annual company gala. For years, that event had been our night. I'd helped Dorian prepare every detail, from the invitations to the seating arrangements. I was always at his side, not just as his wife, but as the quiet force behind his empire. That year, I dressed in a gown he once said was his favorite, hoping to reclaim some piece of us. I wanted the world to see we were still strong. But the moment we walked into the grand hall, I realized I was no longer his partner. I was an afterthought. Dorian barely touched my hand as we entered. Instead, his eyes searched the room until they landed on her. Talia. She was already there, standing near a group of investors, laughing like she belonged. And then, as if I were invisible, Dorian went straight to her. I watched as he introduced her, his voice proud, his hand resting just a little too close to her back. He didn't parade me as his wife. He paraded her, the assistant. He made sure everyone in the room knew her name, her role, her presence. Every smile he gave her was a smile he once saved for me. Every laugh, every touch of his hand on her arm, every boast about her bright future was a dagger in my chest. I stood there, clutching my glass of champagne so tightly I thought it would shatter. Some of the investors glanced at me with pity. Others avoided my eyes altogether. The humiliation was complete. I was no longer the woman beside the CEO. I was a ghost, watching another woman take my place in the very empire I had sacrificed my life to build. The speeches that night blurred together. The music felt distant. I barely tasted the food. All I could see was him and her, moving through the crowd like a power couple in the making. My heart cracked with every laugh they shared, every approving nod from those who once respected me. But beneath the heartbreak, something else began to stir. A fire, small but fierce, sparked inside me. They thought I would fade quietly, that I would let myself be erased. But I knew one thing. I wasn't built to be discarded. Not by Dorian, not by anyone. That night, I vowed to myself, if he wanted to replace me, he would soon learn the cost. The papers came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I remember the sound of the knock on the door, sharp and formal, followed by a man in a suit handing me an envelope with my name printed neatly across the front. My hands shook as I opened it, the words blurring together until one line cut through the fog. Petition for divorce. When Dorian came home that evening, I waited for an explanation, for some flicker of guilt or hesitation. Instead, he walked into the living room, loosened his tie, and spoke with the coldness of a stranger. "It's over, Amara," he said flatly. "Sign the papers. Make this easier on both of us." I stared at him, my chest tightening, my voice breaking as I asked, "After everything we've built, everything I've given up, this is it?" He didn't flinch. He didn't even look at me as he poured himself a drink. "You'll walk away with nothing," he said, as if it were the simplest fact in the world. "The house, the cars, the company, they're all under my name. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Those words crushed me more than the divorce itself. Nothing. That was what I meant to him after years of sacrifice. I wanted to scream, to throw the glass in his hand against the wall, to demand he look at me and remember who I was. But instead, I stood frozen, watching the man I loved sip whiskey like he hadn't just shattered my entire existence. Later that night, I called the only person I knew could steady me, my best friend, Kendra Holt. She came over within an hour, her presence filling the silence that had swallowed me whole. Kendra was everything I wasn't in that moment. Sharp, unshaken, fiercely protective. When I handed her the papers, she flipped through them quickly, her eyes narrowing with every page. "Amara," she said firmly, placing the documents on the table, "he's trying to intimidate you. Don't let him. You've given too much, sacrificed too much, to walk away like you don't exist. He may think he holds all the cards, but trust me, you have more power than you realize." Tears spilled down my face as I whispered, "I don't even know where to start. He's already erased me." Kendra leaned forward, her voice low and steady. "Then start by remembering who you are. You didn't build his empire just to be tossed aside. He thinks you're weak, but that's his biggest mistake. Use it. Her words sank deep into me, planting something I hadn't felt in months: resolve. Maybe I wasn't ready to fight yet. Maybe I was still broken and raw, but I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. As Kendra squeezed my hand, I realized the truth. If Dorian thought I would disappear quietly, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Seeds of revenge were already taking root. I couldn't sleep after Kendra left that night. The house felt colder than ever, like every wall carried the echo of Dorian's words. You'll walk away with nothing. I lay awake replaying our entire marriage in my head, searching for the place where I had lost myself, where I had surrendered everything to him. But as the hours dragged by, a memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in years. It was from the very beginning, back when his luxury empire was nothing but an idea scribbled in notebooks and late-night conversations at our tiny apartment. He had the vision, yes, but I had the means. My father's inheritance wasn't much by the world's standards, but it was enough to plant a seed. I poured nearly every dollar into Dorian's dream, funding the first office, paying for the licenses, even covering payroll for the handful of employees who believed in him before anyone else did. I remembered the day we went to the lawyer's office to incorporate the company. Dorian had been so focused on impressing the attorney that he barely glanced at the documents. I was the one who asked the questions, who made sure the details were clear. The lawyer suggested, almost casually, that since the funding had come from me, I should be listed as a co-founder. Dorian waved his hand dismissively and said, "Sure, whatever makes this faster." He wanted to get back to his meeting with a potential investor. So I signed quietly, without realizing what it would mean years later. 52%. That was the number written beside my name. Majority shareholder. At the time, it felt symbolic more than anything else. I wasn't interested in power or titles. I trusted my husband completely, believed we were one body, one dream, one future. I tucked the paperwork away in a folder and never thought twice about it. Now, as I sat alone in the dark, that memory hit me like a lightning strike. All this time, while he strutted around as the face of the company, while he lavished attention on his mistress, while he told me I was nothing, I had been holding the very foundation of his empire in my hands. He didn't even know it. I went to the old cabinet where I kept our early records, hands trembling as I pulled out the file. And there it was, faded but clear, Amara Ellison, 52%. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the numbers. I had been so blind, so consumed with love and loyalty, that I'd forgotten my own worth, my own leverage. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had the power to take back everything he tried to strip from me. The empire he thought belonged to him was mine by right. I never wanted to use it against him, but now? Now it was my weapon. For the first time since he handed me those divorce papers, I felt something stronger than pain. I felt power. I arrived at the office early, long before anyone else had stepped through the revolving doors. My heels clicked against the marble floor with deliberate confidence, a sound that felt like armor against the storm of emotions swirling inside me. For months, I had planned this moment, replaying it over and over in my mind, imagining every expression, every word, every reaction. Today, nothing would surprise me. I was ready. As I walked past the reception, I noticed familiar faces, employees whispering, casting curious glances my way. They had heard the rumors, the tension in the air, but no one had dared act. I didn't need them to speak. I only needed the room where the heart of the empire, and the man who thought he owned it, would be waiting. The boardroom doors loomed ahead. Through the glass, I could see them. Dorian, leaning casually against the conference table, laughing with Talia. She sat beside him, the picture of triumph, smiling as if the empire already belonged to her. My stomach tightened, a familiar mix of anger and determination, but I kept my steps steady. When I pushed the doors open, the room fell silent. Dorian looked up first, his eyes narrowing slightly as recognition hit. Talia's smile faltered, replaced by a flash of uncertainty. I walked slowly toward the table, letting every eye follow me. My presence alone shifted the atmosphere. The room seemed to pulse with anticipation. "Dorian," I began, my voice calm, measured, slicing through the tension. "Talia," I added, letting my gaze linger on her. "We need to have a little chat about the company." He smirked, the same arrogance that had haunted me for months, and said, "Amara, what are you doing here? This isn't." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Let me save you the trouble of explaining. Board members, I believe you should know the facts. I reached into my bag and placed the folder on the table, sliding it toward the center so everyone could see. I opened it, revealing the legal documents, the share certificates, my name boldly printed with 52% ownership. A murmur ran through the room. Dorian's smug expression faltered, just slightly at first, then completely as realization dawned. He looked at me, his eyes wide, searching for some sign of error, some loophole he could exploit. There was none. I held all the power he thought he had. The board members exchanged glances, the energy in the room shifting like a tide. Whispers became nods, and nods became quiet acknowledgments of loyalty. I wasn't just Dorian's wife anymore. I was the majority shareholder, the decision-maker, the one who controlled every aspect of the empire. I leaned slightly forward, my tone gentle but unyielding. I hope we can move forward with clarity. The decisions of this company will now be made with the majority shareholder present. I trust you'll respect that. Talia's eyes widened in panic, and Dorian sank into his chair, the weight of reality pressing down on him. The empire he flaunted, the power he believed was his, was slipping through his fingers, and I was the one holding the reins. For the first time in months, I felt a surge of calm triumph. This was my moment, and nothing could take it from me. The boardroom was buzzing the morning after my confrontation, but this time, the energy was different. People moved with purpose, not fear. I stood at the head of the table, calm, poised, and fully aware of the power I now held. Dorian sat across from me, his jaw tight, fists clenched, trying to mask the panic that had set in overnight. Talia hovered beside him, her confident facade cracking with every passing second. I began by outlining the first series of changes. Effective immediately, I said, my voice steady. Dorian will no longer be involved in executive decisions. All strategic planning, financial approvals, and investor communications will be routed through my office. Talia, your role will be shifted to administrative support only. There was a pause, a collective intake of breath. The board members looked at each other, then at me, their respect tangible. They understood that the woman who had been invisible for years was now in charge. Dorian exploded. Amara, you can't do this. I built this company. Everything you have is because of me. His voice rang with fury, but the force behind it had lost its power. He was no longer the one in control. I met his gaze evenly, without a flicker of fear. I think you're forgetting something, Dorian, I said softly, letting the words cut. You didn't build this alone. You took for granted the person who funded, supported, and sustained this company from day one. You were never the owner of my loyalty or my sacrifice. I trusted you, and this is the result of your own choices. The room remained silent except for the sound of my voice carrying the weight of truth. I could see Talia shrink under the pressure, her eyes darting nervously between me and Dorian. She had believed her security came from him, that his influence would protect her position. But she was wrong. Without his power, without my approval, she had nothing. Her ambition, which had once seemed unstoppable, faltered. I moved through the room with purpose, addressing investors and key employees, outlining plans for expansion, ethical restructuring, and innovation initiatives. I spoke with clarity, intelligence, and confidence. Every idea I presented was met with nods of approval, emails exchanged on the spot, and quiet murmurs of admiration. They saw not a betrayed wife, but a leader who had quietly shaped the empire they had invested in. Dorian's anger only grew, his words turning desperate. This is betrayal, Amara. You're destroying everything we built. I smiled faintly, letting the calm in my voice do the work my hands could not. Betrayal? I think you mean consequence. This is what happens when you betray the person who always had your back. By the end of the day, the power dynamic was clear. I was in command, and the board, the investors, and even the staff recognized it. Talia avoided my gaze, realizing that her safety and advancement were tied entirely to my decisions, not Dorian's empty promises. For the first time in months, I felt satisfaction, not the hollow kind that fades, but the deep, steady warmth of justice served. The first wave of revenge had begun, and I could see the fear and respect mingling in equal measure across the room. This was only the beginning. Dorian didn't take my takeover quietly. Within days, he hired a team of high-powered lawyers, filing motions and claims, trying to challenge my ownership, insisting that I had somehow manipulated the incorporation process or forged documents. He was furious, ranting to anyone who would listen that I had betrayed him, that I had no right to control the company he had built from the ground up. But I had anticipated this. Every receipt, every signed contract, every email chain from the earliest days of the company had been meticulously stored. My files were organized, labeled, and undeniable. I handed everything over to Kendra, who worked with precision, presenting the evidence in court and to the board. Each document, each proof of funding and contribution, painted a clear story. The company had been built together, and I had been the majority shareholder all along. Dorian's confidence crumbled. He had relied on intimidation and charm for years, assuming no one would question him. Now, with the documents laid bare, he looked smaller, weaker, and for the first time, genuinely powerless. The board and investors, once loyal to his image of authority, began to waver. Whispers of doubt spread through the office corridors. Questions about credibility and leadership whispered in board meetings and investor calls. No one wanted to risk their reputation by siding with a man whose empire was slipping through his fingers. Talia, who had once flaunted herself as Dorian's shield and partner, realized the truth much faster. Without his backing, without the promise of power or money, she had no place in the company. She tried to plead, to negotiate, to charm, but the investors and board ignored her. She could feel the walls closing in, the security she had taken for granted disappearing like sand through her fingers. By the end of the week, she was gone, quietly resigning and leaving Dorian to face the consequences alone. The legal battles stretched over weeks, and every hearing was a reminder of Dorian's overconfidence. Each presentation, each deposition, reinforced my ownership, my stake, and my authority. The once charismatic CEO who had commanded attention now stumbled over his words, misremembered dates, and contradicted himself in ways that made the board question his judgment. His empire, which had seemed untouchable, was slipping through his grasp, leaving him exposed, vulnerable, and irrelevant. I watched all of it unfold with a strange mix of detachment and satisfaction. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice, the universe balancing itself after years of betrayal. The man who had dismissed me, humiliated me, and tried to erase me from the life and business we built together was left with nothing. No company, no influence, no loyal assistant. His name became a cautionary tale whispered among employees, investors, and social circles alike. Meanwhile, I thrived. The company stabilized under my leadership, investors regained confidence, and employees respected the woman who had saved the empire from mismanagement. I was no longer just the supportive wife in the background. I was the backbone, the decision-maker, the force that drove the business forward. Dorian's fall was complete. From the heights of power and prestige, he had plummeted to irrelevance, leaving me to not only reclaim but elevate everything he once thought was his alone. I didn't gloat. I simply took my rightful place, stronger, wiser, and completely untouchable. With Dorian completely out of the picture and the legal battles behind me, I finally felt the weight of the empire resting fully on my shoulders. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, but for the first time in years, I felt alive in a way I hadn't before. I wasn't just a figurehead or a supportive spouse. I was the leader, the architect of our future. The first order of business was restructuring. I implemented policies that promoted transparency and accountability, ensuring that no one could manipulate the company as Dorian had manipulated me. Departments were reorganized, teams strengthened, and long-overlooked voices were finally given a platform. I encouraged creativity, rewarded innovation, and fostered an environment where ideas mattered more than appearances. Investors quickly noticed the change, impressed by the clarity and vision I brought to the table. I also focused on ethical practices, something I had always valued but had been ignored in the rush for profit under Dorian. Sustainability initiatives were introduced, employee benefits improved, and charitable partnerships expanded. The company began to shine not just for its financial success, but for its integrity, a reflection of the values I had quietly carried all along. Recognition came faster than I expected. Industry magazines featured my story, highlighting how the wife behind the CEO had become the driving force of the empire. Awards followed, and invitations to speak at conferences arrived almost weekly. It was validating, yes, but more importantly, it was proof that my worth had never been defined by anyone else's acknowledgement. I had been underestimated for years, and now, the world was finally seeing what I had always known. I was capable, brilliant, and resilient. Through it all, Kendra remained my anchor. She didn't just provide legal guidance. She offered wisdom, perspective, and unwavering support. Whenever I felt doubt creeping in or the weight of responsibility pressing too hard, she reminded me of how far I had come, of the strength I had demonstrated even when I had felt powerless. She was more than a friend. She was my confidant, my strategist, and sometimes my voice of reason when I needed it most. As the months passed, I noticed a shift in myself as well. The anger that had fueled my initial drive softened into a quiet confidence. I was no longer defined by betrayal or loss, but by the choices I made, the vision I held, and the integrity I maintained. I allowed myself to dream again, to think about the life I wanted on my own terms, free from manipulation, deceit, or dependence on anyone else's validation. I began to travel, to invest in personal projects, and to mentor young women who reminded me of the ambitious, hopeful girl I once was. Healing was slow, but it was steady, and it felt good to finally live life as my own person, not as someone's shadow. Looking around at the company thriving under my leadership, I realized that this wasn't just a new era for the business. It was a new era for me. I wasn't simply surviving, I was thriving. I wasn't just Amara, Dorian's wife. I was Amara Ellison, the woman who had built, saved, and transformed an empire, and in doing so had reclaimed her life. Sitting in my office, overlooking the city skyline, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The months of chaos, heartbreak, and relentless planning had given way to a sense of clarity I had never known. I thought betrayal would break me, that losing the love I had poured my life into would leave a permanent scar. But instead, it had forged something stronger, sharper, and more unyielding. Every late night, every insult, every moment of humiliation had been a stepping stone to this very point. I thought back to the night I discovered Dorian's affair, to the humiliation at the gala, to the cold finality of the divorce papers. Each memory still carried a sting, but now it served a different purpose. It reminded me of the person I had been, the sacrifices I had made, and the courage I had summoned to rise above it all. The pain had not destroyed me, it had awakened me. Betrayal had not ended my story, it had rewritten it. Dorian, who once wielded power like a weapon, had become a footnote in the empire we built together. He had been the public face, the charming CEO, the man everyone admired, but his arrogance and deceit had stripped him of everything that truly mattered. The board no longer sought his approval, investors no longer hung on his promises, and Talia had vanished like a shadow in the sun. Where once he had stood tall and untouchable, now he was irrelevant, forgotten in the very corridors he had once ruled. And me? I had risen from the ashes of my own heartbreak, stepping into the role I had always been destined for. The empire was mine, yes, but more importantly, my life was mine. I had reclaimed my power, not just over the company, but over my own destiny. I could see the future stretching ahead, full of possibilities I had once shelved for the sake of loyalty, trust, and love misplaced. Now, nothing held me back. I thought about the lessons I had learned, the value of self-worth, the strength found in resilience, and the clarity that comes from standing firm in truth. I had discovered that liberation often arrives through the trials we fear most, and that sometimes the greatest victories come not from the destruction of others, but from the recognition of our own power. As I looked out over the city, the sun reflecting off the glass towers, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The empire thrived, the team respected and followed me, and I had healed in ways I never imagined possible. Dorian's betrayal, once the source of my deepest pain, had become the catalyst for my greatest triumph. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence of the office wrap around me. I didn't need revenge to feel complete, nor did I crave the attention of those who had once doubted me. I had everything I needed: strength, independence, and a life rebuilt on my terms. I didn't just survive the storm, I had risen through it, stronger and wiser. And in that moment, I understood the truth. I thrive unapologetically, fully, and forever on my own terms. Do you think Amara handled her betrayal the right way by taking control of the company? Or should she have forgiven Dorian and tried to rebuild their marriage? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. And if stories like this inspire you, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.